share more information regarding the deliveries of US vaccine donations, which began last week throughout the African continent. And she will also highlight the US-AU missions partnership with the Africa CDC in the fight against COVID. And then we will also be joined by Mr. Strive Masiwa, and he is the African Union's Special Envoy on COVID-19 and is also the coordinator of the African Vaccine Acquisition Task Force, AVAT. And he will be joining us today to update us on vaccine acquisition and distribution throughout the continent. Today, we are coming to you in English and French. And when we come to our question and answer section, please send your questions to +251 94 550 2310. And that will be on WhatsApp. You can also come in live or utilize the question and answer section. All right, now let's get into our briefing from Dr. John. Dr. John, good morning, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Wayne. Greetings, a very warm welcome. And Africa CDC. At this time, I would like to share with you updates on the COVID-19 situation on the continent. And as usual, I'll divide my remarks into three. First of all, look at the epidemiological situation, and then discuss what Africa CDC is currently doing to support member states to fight the third wave, and then focus on the vaccine and vaccination situation on the continent. Let me join Wayne in welcoming Ambassador Jessie Lapen, who has been a very strong advocate and supporter of Africa CDC's efforts since this pandemic started. And we'll have an opportunity during this very important session to discuss more. As Wayne mentioned, Mr. Masiwa, Strive Masiwa, will be joining us shortly to discuss and announce to you all some very interesting updates, good progress with respect to vaccine delivery from AVAT. So let's start with the epidemiological situation. As of this morning, 9 a.m. East African time, about 6.3 million cases of COVID have been reported across all 55 member states. And this accounts for 3% of the total cases reported globally. Of this number, unfortunately, 160,000 individuals have died, and this represents a case fatality ratio of 2.5%. 5 countries are accounting for over 63% of total cases across the continent. They include South Africa with 37%, Morocco 9%, Tunisia 9%, Egypt and Ethiopia 4% each. There are 4 countries that have a case fatality rate of about 5%. They include Egypt, Sahrawi Republic, Somalia, and Sudan. Again, as I indicated earlier, we are in the middle of a third wave across the continent. And as we speak, 53% of our member states, that is 29 countries, are experiencing a severe third wave. And of that, 20 countries are experiencing a more aggressive third wave than previously what we observed with the second wave. Since the last time we briefed, 6 additional countries are now reporting a third wave. They include Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Lesotho, Libya, Mauritania, and Morocco. 2 countries are actually experiencing a fourth wave. That is Algeria and Tunisia. With respect to the variants of concern, 38 countries out of the 55 member states are now reporting the Alpha variant. 3 additional new member states have now reported since last week the Alpha variant, and these include Benin, Chad, and Namibia. 32 countries are now reporting the Beta variant, and these include, and we have a long list of those. and 21 countries are reporting the Delta variant. And one additional country, that is Namibia, has now reported the Delta variant since the last time we briefed. And you can go to our website at www.africacdc.org and pathogen genomics to see an update of where all the variants that have been reported are. So let us now look at the changes in the epidemiological situation with respect to, first of all, the 1 week interval since last Thursday to now, and then we'll look at 4 weeks. So over the last, what we call the epidemiological week of 28, this is this week, and compare that with last week, a total of 281 new cases have been reported across the continent, and that represents a 3% decrease over the last week. And the highest proportion of these new cases are coming from Southern Africa with 57%, North Africa 32%, East Africa 6%, West Africa 4%, and Central Africa 1%. The following 6 countries are reporting the highest daily incident per million population, include Seychelles, Botswana, Tunisia, Libya, and Namibia. In terms of the new deaths, a total of 6,161 new deaths were reported across the continent over the reporting period, compared to 5,492 from the previous week. And this represents a 12% increase in the number of new deaths compared to last week. Now, if you now look at the 4 weeks period, that is over a period between 21st of June and 18th of July, we observed that a total of 16% average increase in new cases have occurred across the continent, with the highest numbers being reported in West Africa with 41%, 36% in North Africa, 12% increase in Southern Africa, 1% increase in East Africa, and a 2% decrease in Central Africa. If you look at break it down by the most populous countries, Nigeria leads the way with an increase of 64%, South Africa 10%, Kenya 4%, with decreases in Egypt, Ethiopia, and DRC. However, the death rates over the last 4 weeks has been a 21% average increase, okay, over that period of time. In terms of testing, as a continent, a total of 57 million COVID tests have been conducted. And last week alone, a total of about 1.4 million tests were conducted. And that represents a 6% increase when you compare this to the previous week. Unfortunately, the case positivity rate remains high at around 11%. We want to see countries reporting about 5% or less, but overall average is around 11% as we speak. 25% of our member states, or 14 countries, are reporting test positivity rates of 12%. We can discuss that later. So what are we doing in the midst of this Africa CDC to support countries to address the third wave? What we are doing is dispatching what we call the SWAT teams, the SWAT teams, which is a military term borrowed from the military term, which is a deployment strategy that you go in tactically and with commodities and responders, and to support countries to fight the third wave, and then you move to another country. So that strategy has enabled us to be deployed in Seychelles, Zambia, Cameroon, Sierra Leone, and Namibia, and we'll continue to rotate. So we go in with smaller teams, recruit in-country about 500 to 1,000 responders, fight where the hotspots are, then we move the team to another country. I think we'll continue to roll that until we bring down. Our goal is to bring down bend the curve as quickly as possible so that it can relieve the health system, the burden on the health systems, as you have been reading on the news. So let me just conclude on the vaccine and really just give you high-level information as you hear more from our 2 participants. As of today, the continent has acquired 82.7 million COVID vaccine doses amongst 51 member states. Of that number, 61.3 million doses have been administered, and that represents about 74%. In other words, of it, our doses are not being wasted. At least up to about 75% of the doses have been used. And if you look at those in the individuals that have actually received a full coverage, that accounts for about 1.3% of the population. That is the full immunization. Just some numbers to substantiate that. Morocco has used up about 80% of its supplies. South Africa has used up about 64% of its supplies. Egypt, about 68% of all its supplies. Nigeria, 99.97% of its supplies, and Algeria, 68% of all its supplies. And more of that information can actually be seen on our website. 3 countries are yet to start vaccination. That is Tanzania, Eritrea, and Burundi. At this point, I would like to give you and to conclude some updates on some recent developments. You heard yesterday that Fisa and BioNTech and the South African BioVac Institute will start working together to produce or manufacture about 100 million doses of vaccines over 2022. That will be essentially the fill and finish, similar to what the Aspen is doing with the Johnson & Johnson. You also heard that on July the 15th, Germany was donating 30 million doses of vaccines across the world. But very importantly, 21 million doses of vaccines are being shipped out of the US donation that has started in 49 countries, and that include the Johnson & Johnson doses, the Moderna, the Pfizer. 1 million of that donation will be made more bilateral, and you have a chance to hear more from Ambassador Le Pen. So thank you for the opportunity. As always, I look forward to an exciting conversation, and Wayne, over to you.
Thank you very much, John. It's now time to introduce Her Excellency Jessie Le Pen, after whom we will be hearing from Mr. Strive Masiwa. So Ambassador Le Pen is the head of the US mission to the African Union, as I stated earlier, and she's here to share with us information regarding the delivery of the US vaccine donations throughout the continent, as well as to update us on the nature of the partnership that the USAU has with the African Union and with the Africa CDC in fighting COVID-19. Ambassador, a very good morning to you, and you have the floor.
Good morning. Thanks. Thanks so much. I'm sure many of our media colleagues have been tracking, and as Dr. John indicated, the US is now delivering COVID-19 vaccines across the continent. So this week, we have already delivered about 1 million doses of Johnson & Johnson to Burkina Faso.
Ambassador, excuse me. Can I ask you to switch on your video?
It's on.
All right.
It should be on, and it shows as recording.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Sure. So for this week, we've done about 1 million vaccines of the J&J that have gone to Burkina Faso, Djibouti, Ethiopia, the Gambia, and Senegal. There'll be another 1.2 million doses this week to Cameroon, Lesotho, Niger, Zambia, and Central African Republic. So these deliveries are the first tranche of approximately 25 million COVID-19 vaccine doses being donated to Africa. That's out of 80 million doses that the Biden administration announced for global donations last month. So in the next coming weeks, we'll continue to see additional deliveries to reach this 25 million. Crucially, we expect these shipments to be the first of many as US government contributes to the AU target of vaccinating at least 60% across the continent. US government and Africa CDC worked closely together to coordinate on allocation of these vaccine donations. Specifically, we coordinated with with Dr. John and with Strive and with others on the AU's Africa Vaccine Acquisition Task Team, or AVAT, which we'll hear more about. For us, the decision to collaborate in this way was significant. I think it reflects how impressed we've been with Africa CDC and with the AU's continent-wide coordination efforts. So AU leadership in the continent's response has been consistent from the outset of the pandemic, mobilizing health ministers, establishing a procurement platform, and coordinating the continental strategy. In the first waves of the pandemic, we saw the AU had a very well coordinated and effective response, including specifically in supply chain management. More recently, it's developed a continent-wide vaccination plan, so it was a natural partner on the allocation of vaccines. For us at the US mission to the AU, or USAU, this partnership is basically what we've been doing since the establishment of Africa CDC. Our comprehensive approach includes technical assistance from the US Centers for Disease Control, as well as programs with USAID and other government agencies. In this forum, I really want to acknowledge the strength of the USAU partnership and thank Dr. John for his efforts to make this partnership significant and to make these deliveries possible. In addition to these ongoing vaccine deliveries, the US will also donate an additional 500 million Pfizer vaccine doses globally starting in August, as President Biden committed just before the G7. And these vaccines will also be delivered to Africa and other around the world through COVAX. On COVAX, the US is the largest single contributor, having provided $2 billion in March to support procurement and equitable distribution of vaccines around the world. In addition to working with US vaccine manufacturers to increase vaccine supply, we're also working to expand vaccine production in Africa. So the DFC, or the US International Development Finance Corporation, announced on June 30 the US contribution to a $700 million loan being made to expand Aspen Pharma in South Africa. And we've recently signed an agreement with Senegal and other partners for production of COVID-19 vaccines in Senegal. These commitments are really part and parcel of the US historic leadership on humanitarian and health assistance across the continent, including our support to combat COVID-19. Since the outbreak of the pandemic, the US has provided roughly $541 million in health, humanitarian, and economic support assistance to sub-Saharan Africa for COVID response. This follows a roughly $100 billion worth of investment in Africa's public health over the last 2 decades. These investments have contributed to health systems that have helped partner countries to meet the challenges of COVID-19. US contributions to Africa CDC crucially haven't been limited, though, to the US government. US foundations and private companies have also contributed significantly with funds, technical assistance, and commercial solutions, demonstrating that our country's commitment to being a vital health partner to the continent isn't just a priority of government. It's also not just US companies and foundations, and we applaud the recent announcement by the Canada-based MasterCard Foundation of a $1.3 billion contribution to partner with Africa CDC and to help make critical progress to provide COVID vaccines across the continent. We welcome and encourage such support. As Dr. John and others have said repeatedly, none of us is safe until all of us are safe. So as the situation around the globe and on the continent continues to evolve, so does our response. We'll continue to share vaccines from our supply, work with partners around the world, including the African Union and Africa CDC, to get ahead of the virus, follow the science, and support countries in crisis. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That was Ambassador Jessie Lapen, who is the head of the US mission to the African Union. We now move on and welcome Mr. Strive Masiwa, who is the African Union Special Envoy on COVID-19 and is also the coordinator of the African Vaccine Acquisition Task Force, AVAT. And Mr. Masiwa is here to update us on vaccine acquisition and distribution around the continent. Good morning, Mr. Masiwa, and you have the floor.
Good morning. Let me start with just reminding you of our objectives and what we want to achieve. The African Union leadership in August decided that a minimum of 60% of our population must be vaccinated. That amounts to roughly 780 million people out of the 1.3 billion. In addition, the African Union leadership entered into an agreement with the CARICOM countries that they would be part of our joint procurement structures. They have been working with us since June when we set up the Africa Medical Supplies Platform. There are 14 countries from the CARICOM who buy jointly with us in a pooled structure. So putting together the CARICOM demand and our own demand of 780 million people, that means we have to vaccinate approximately 800 million people. The African leadership set up the Africa Vaccine Acquisition Task Force as a mechanism to acquire vaccines and to coordinate the acquisition of vaccines from various partners. For us to achieve 800 million vaccines, 800 million people fully vaccinated, we would need 1.6 billion doses in the double dose regimes, 1.6 billion doses. So any contribution we have to look at the enormity of the task. It is 1.6 billion doses that we would need if it is a single dose, if it is a double dose regime, or 800 million doses if we use the single dose regime, of which there is only currently one supplier who does single dose, which is Johnson & Johnson. The African Union leadership were apprised of this challenge back in August. And that's when they set up the Africa Vaccine Acquisition Task Force. Our mission was to engage the donor community, including the White House. I spoke at the time with the White House under President Trump, and we continued those engagements. After that, we have engaged with partners and nations around the world over making sure they understand what our needs are. Our leadership decided in November, after engagements with the donor community, that our understanding by November was that COVAX could only do 20%, which would be a third of our target. Our clinicians like Dr. John made it absolutely clear that if we only achieve 20% vaccination of the African people, we would live permanently with this disease. And we would now be dependent on a process of natural selection or natural herd immunity. So the African leaders decided that if that was the case, then they must go out and buy vaccines themselves. And it was not because we wanted to compete with COVAX, it was because we were told COVAX could not achieve, the donors were not willing to provide the funding for us to get to 60%. So we accepted that. The African leaders met with President Macron, representing the donors, in November and December, and pleaded with him to engage the other countries to meet us at least halfway, to push their commitments to at least 30% of our population, which would be half of our target. President Macron confirmed that they would indeed get to 30% as a minimum target. I'm not going to relitigate where we are. I'm going to focus now on what we as the African Union are doing. So our own target was to achieve enough vaccines for 400 million people. We engaged all the suppliers who were authorized by the WHO, including the Chinese and the Russian suppliers. We met with them all. And as I've pointed out before, the challenge has been the availability of vaccines, not the availability of money. By November, the African Union, the AVAT task force, had already secured $2 billion, equivalent to what the United States has put into COVAX. We had $2 billion by November. That money was provided by the Afri-Exim Bank, an African institution funded primarily by African countries, the largest single shareholders being Nigeria and Egypt. 10 finance ministers of the African Union members met and increased the capital of the African Union, of the Afri-Exim Bank, in order for it to have the capacity to finance direct vaccine acquisitions. I consider that to be one of the most important meetings in modern Africa. When African countries came together, we had all the finance ministers, all the health ministers, and we said, we will buy vaccines and we will buy them with our own money. And then the African Union itself, at its annual meeting in January, issued a resolution calling on the African member states who are financiers of the Afri-Exim Bank to increase its capital base to enable it to fund. That resolution is available for anyone to observe. It shows our own determination to drive our own destiny. So we, having secured the funding, we engaged Johnson & Johnson. As I've explained to you before, the reason we engaged Johnson & Johnson was that they are the only one of the major suppliers who had an agreement to produce from the African continent. It was clear to us by January that vaccine nationalism was being played out over production assets. That is where it is played out. The countries with the production assets control the release of vaccines. So we at least could rely on one production asset, which was on African soil, which was the Aspen facility, which the ambassador rightly pointed out, they are supporting. But the Aspen facility was already at a position to deliver 300 million doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So President Ramaphosa, as African Union chair, led the negotiations. Myself and John Kengasong here, we were members of the committee that negotiated with Johnson & Johnson. And Johnson & Johnson, like all the suppliers, wanted upfront payment, a bank guarantee. We provided all that to the level of $2 billion US. And our order with them is made up of two parts. It is a 400 million dose order, which when delivered by September next year, starting next week, all shipments begin next week. And when we have completed the delivery of the Johnson & Johnson shipments, we will have achieved 30%, which is 50% of the set target, with the hope that the donor community, now led by the United States, will meet us halfway for the other 30%. So really the good news from my side is this. Commencing next week, we will ship 6 million doses of Johnson & Johnson vaccines for the July-August period. These are single-dose vaccines. They'll go to 27 African countries that have already paid for their vaccines. An additional 18 African countries are in the process of finalizing their loans from the World Bank. We're meeting again with the World Bank tomorrow. They have committed to fully funding those countries that need funding support. So we expect that by the end of August, 45 countries will have completed their first shipments. Thereafter, Johnson & Johnson will be shipping from the Aspen facility on average 10 million single-dose vaccines, 10 million September, 10 million October, 10 million December. In January, we moved to 20 million a month, and we will continue exponentially increasing that until all 400 million doses have been delivered by September next year. So we have, as AVAT, we have institutionalized ourselves. The union has authorized us to turn AVAT into a standing permanent structure for purchasing of vaccine now and in future. The AVAT is now called the Africa Vaccine Acquisition Trust. That was the special purpose vehicle which was set up to fund the purchase of vaccines. So we're now trustees of that with members of our leadership. The AVAT vehicle is the vehicle for vaccine acquisition partnerships. That's why in statements now you see AVAT rather than Africa CDC. Africa CDC is a member of AVAT. So the AVAT vehicle continues to look for opportunities to acquire additional vaccines. Let me conclude by talking about Fisa and the production side. As I've pointed out before, in my capacity as the African Union Special Envoy, I am a volunteer. I'm a volunteer businessman. I'm not in this industry. I was invited by President Ramaphosa to do this job because I did the same job during the Ebola crisis. So I have spent the last year working full-time on this. I advised my presidents. I advised my presidents that we need production capacity now. If we don't have production capacity, if this crisis comes back, we'll be in the same position. In the last few weeks, President Ramaphosa and the AVAT team have been engaged with the European governments about the delivery of vaccine substance rather than vaccine donations. We want substance to the factories. So the Europeans have agreed to ship vaccine substance to our facility in Aspen. So the facility in Aspen, which was previously taking drug substance from the United States, is emergent facility, is producing these vaccines that I have mentioned from vaccine substance delivered from Europe. This is a result of very successful negotiations between President Ramaphosa and his counterpart, President Ursula von der Leyen. And we really appreciate this partnership from Europe because it is fundamental to our approach, which is we want to ramp up production on the continent, which means we want drug substance to also begin to flow. We won't solve this permanently through donations. We have to have a sustainable approach to production. We were in negotiations with Fisa. We had a lot of difficulty negotiating with Fisa. I tell you straight as it is, we had a lot of difficulties. Finally, we called off the negotiations. The chairman of Fisa called me, Albert Bola. I commend him. He called me. He said, I'm sorry, this worked out this way. How do we fix this? He's the only one of the pharma chairmen who did that. He said, I want to fix this. Help me understand what the problem is. So we discussed it extensively. I informed President Ramaphosa, who also got engaged. He came back to us and he said, I'm going to the White House to see how we can do this. So we feel very much that the decision of the United States to work with Pfizer to purchase vaccines is something that is a game changer in all this. Okay. Further, I told Albert Bola that they must produce from the African continent. He called me and he said, my board has approved your proposal that we produce from the African continent. So they will be producing 100 million doses a year from the BioVac facility, another vaccine producer based in Africa. But we are not stopping there. We want to make clear to all suppliers, as I have told them, that if you want a long-term future with us now, you produce from Africa. We don't mind, you can, if you want land, we'll give you. If you want to own everything 100%, we don't mind, just produce from the African continent. Because when we got into trouble this time, it was because there was no production from the African continent. The countries that had production, whether it was India, the United States, Europe, Japan, they all restricted shipments. So now we are pleased to see that Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer have made commitments to ship from Africa. We, however, want to make it clear that we prefer that they license producers in Africa rather than to produce under contract, because we want to be treated the same way as they produce in India, okay? If they can produce under license in India, they should be able to produce under license in Africa, but we leave these to be purely commercial negotiations between the parties. I'm not involved in those things. So to summarize, the African Union has purchased 400 million doses. 220 million has been paid for, 180 million is an option we trigger in September if the orders have come in. I'm pleased to say that African countries have ordered and placed pre-orders in excess of 400 million doses. This demonstrates that they are willing to pay for their vaccines. They are willing to stand together and they are willing to fight this disease. So and for that, we are extremely grateful. We have entered into an agreement with UNICEF to act as our distributor. They did not do the purchasing on our behalf. they act as the distributors. So as I'm speaking now, UNICEF have begun to receive instructions from us to collect doses from the factory at Aspen and to begin to move them to the various countries. I will stop there to allow us to have a discussion. Unfortunately, today I won't be able to stay throughout, but I'm pleased to pick up on these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was Mr. Strive Masiwa, who is the AU Special Envoy on COVID-19 and coordinator of the African Vaccine Acquisition Task Force, which, as he said, has now been transformed into a trust. Very significant developments there. Thank you very much. Now we move on to your questions, and the very first person to ask a question was Elana Gordon, who is with The World from GBH and PRX, a national radio show in the United States. And she says, my question is, and this is to Dr. John, Niger has not experienced many cases of COVID-19. Is this a unique outlier? And if so, what can the rest of the region learn about the virus from this situation? Do you think that it is possible that the country will be able to avoid an outbreak altogether? That the situation is uniquely hostile to COVID-19? Or do you worry about cases growing there? And this is in reference to Niger. Dr. John, that is for you.
Thank you, Wayne, and the reporter. I just want to say that we have to take a very close look at Niger and other countries across the continent that find themselves in a similar situation to understand what is going on in the country and what are some of the factors that might be leading to that. Is it a natural process? Meaning that are there any factors that are making the situation look stable, or is it underreporting of the cases? There are so many things that we need to look at from epidemiologically and make sure that science guides us into drawing the conclusions there. I think that is one. The second thing is that it's a general warning I've had for this, for our continent from the beginning. This is a very treacherous virus. I'm a virologist for over 3 decades, and viruses will tend to give you that false sense of complacency, seed itself into the population, and then explode. We've seen this across the continent, in Liberia, in many countries, that even Uganda started off with very low numbers, and then, of course, you see where it is now. I mean, Namibia and others. So again, a very cautionary word here to any country that is seeing low numbers. Let's use the full power of epidemiology to understand what is going on before we jump into conclusions. But be careful. This is a dangerous virus. It's a treacherous virus, and we just don't know how it will pan out. It may be delayed epidemic or outbreaks in Niger, but at this point, it's very dangerous to conclude that they have an unusual situation.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I'm going to ask you, as we've done when we are in a tight corner because of time, please stick to one priority question per person so that we can accommodate as many as we can. All right, now let me welcome Gabrielle Steinhauser from the Wall Street Journal. Gabrielle, good morning. Please go ahead with your question.
Thank you so much. Good morning. What is the realistic target for African countries to achieve in terms of their population being vaccinated by the end of this year, given the supply agreements and promises currently in place? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Who is your question targeted at?
I think it's for Dr. John.
Dr. John.
A realistic target, I mean, Gabriela, is that we are aiming to immunize, and we still remain focused with that we should be able to use science to drive our targets, which is we need to get at least 25 to 30% of our population vaccinated. If we have to fight this pandemic and make sure that it doesn't get into endemicity. We are still very focused on that. If we listen to the numbers that Mr. Masiwa put out there, and we also factor in the bilateral donations that Ambassador Lapen mentioned and other projections that we are having there, it is very possible that we can achieve that target if the vaccines truly start rolling out in August and scale up in September and November. It is very, very doable there. I think, however, we have to be very careful that as vaccines are beginning to roll out on the continent, we also have the capacity to increase our ability to roll out the vaccination. We've always maintained that vaccines plus vaccination equals life save and economic save. So again, we remain very optimistic that we will be able to, if we have a predictable supply of vaccines, we should be able to roll them out and get to at least 30% of our population by the end of the year.
John and I work together, so sometimes we're like twins. So we can contradict each other. He's given you a dimension to this. I'm going to give you the numbers. The most guaranteed position that we have right now on delivery of vaccines is what I just gave you, the AVAT delivery. Okay, we've paid for it. The production is there. We have 45 million doses to be delivered by the end of December. Okay, that's 45 million people. Okay, so you can run that number, 45 million. Okay, the US government has kindly committed around 25 million doses at present. Okay, and I have them all I have everything in my head. Okay, roughly 15 million of that are double dose. Okay, the other 10 are Johnson & Johnson at the present moment. So you can run the number, 7.5 million plus 10, that's 17.5 million plus 45 million. If the United States, and I have no reason to believe they will not achieve this, they are the United States. We don't know what portion of the 500 global announced is for Africa. But let us assume for a moment that it's 50%. Ambassador, we want at least 50%. And you know that I have been saying that. If so, let's assume that the US government gives us 50% of the 500. That's 250 million doses, 125 million people vaccinated. That's not going to happen between September and December, impossible. Okay, and even if it did, the absorptive capacity of a Pfizer vaccine is much harder. It's going to be to more limited countries because we don't have in place the full cold storage infrastructure for the ultra cold chain required around Pfizer. But let's assume that that 250 million is delivered over 12 months to September, say to September next year. Okay, maybe that's circa another 20 million a month. Okay, so certainly the US commitment is 50-50 where we are as Africa. Okay, we love that. It's a 50-50 partnership. We've been meeting with the US diplomats, John and I, and some of our colleagues. We meet with your people almost every week. We talk about the distribution, the deliveries, and so forth. It's the best part of the partnership. Now, COVAX, we haven't written them off. Okay, so let's look at what COVAX can deliver. They were supposed to deliver 700 by the end of the year. They have delivered, give or take, 60 million doses. Okay, double dose regime around the AstraZeneca Covishield vaccine from India. Now, everything now depends on India. Does India open up to deliver, to allow the Indian manufacturers to release the vaccines? Because COVAX can only rely on the Indian supplies. And those are being politically restricted. It's not the manufacturers but it's political. Now, India's position is not different from other countries. So I'm not going to bash India on the head. We've been meeting with Indian diplomats as Avat, pushing them to say, please release the vaccines to COVAX, that COVAX has paid for, so that we can get our distribution, okay? Because again, contrary to what people may think, we meet regularly with COVAX. And there's no day that goes by without some communication between us and the COVAX guys. We're critical of things that have been done, but we work with them, okay? You can criticize me if I go wrong, but we can work together, okay? And we work very well with Dr. Seth Berkley, explaining to him our sources of frustration and the problems that we see. And we go out to try even to force the hand on them. So the position is very clear. There's no possibility that we can vaccinate 60% of the African population by December. Impossible. Not as things stand, okay? Could we achieve it by September next year, August, September next year? With the current availability of vaccines, that's our best hope. We can only speak from the African Union perspective that whether or not donors come to the table, we will do our very best with our meager resources to take our continent to 60%. But we appreciate the extraordinary commitment of the Biden-Harris administration. Sorry for the longevity, but I hope that covers a bit of ground for some of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we move on with our questions, and the next one is for the ambassador, and it is coming from Kara Anna of the Associated Press. So Kara says, what is the country by country breakdown for the 25 million vaccine doses that the United States is donating to the African Union? And how many of the 500 million Pfizer doses committed by the US are going to African countries?
Thanks very much. So as Strive said, on the 500 million, there is not yet a determination. We know that is of huge interest. And frankly, I think in terms of both your questions, we understand the huge interest, the bottom line being, when will a particular country or community get vaccinated? So on the 500 million, I don't yet have an answer. We're still working that through. On the issue of allocations more broadly for this first 25 million, we did the allocation in close partnership with Strive, with Dr. John, and also with national government. We looked at criteria around the epidemic, around national programs. What vaccines did they already have? What were they using? What was the level of vulnerability? And on the basis of inputs like that, reached a proposed allocation that was then offered. Countries then took up the offer, and in the vast majority of countries, indeed, they took up the offer that the US through AVAT and African Union and Africa CDC put on the table. And now, as I say, they are rolling out the specific numbers. I don't have all of them at this point. Those, we have the numbers, which we're happy to provide you, for the deliveries that have already been made. And in the other cases, I just basically, as deliveries happen, I don't want to give you the wrong number. We've seen a lot of bad information already in this pandemic, so that's something I don't want to do. But we're happy as deliveries get made to make specific information available. And certainly our embassies across the continent are doing that in partnership with national governments and civil society, so that people have visibility on the donations that were being made. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We move on now to Paul Adepoju. And Paul says, for Dr. John, I'd like to know whether the continent is now testing enough to have more accurate data on the state of the pandemic in Africa, And also, what is the latest update on vaccination in Tanzania?
So, Paul, the continent is not testing enough. I mean, as you heard me stated today, our test positivity ratio is around 9. So that is a test per case. I mean, I would like to see it above 10. Okay, that is clearly still a shortage there, and we continue to be encouraged that, as I indicated earlier, that there was an increase this week, but we like to see a steady increase over time, because the foundation for fighting any infectious disease is good testing. And we have to test at scale all the time and maintain that level of testing. So we are not yet there, I think, but we are very encouraged with the progress that has been achieved so far. For Tanzania, again, as I said, there are 3 countries, Tanzania, Burundi, and Eritrea, that we still don't have vaccination started there. So that is the current situation with respect to those countries there. So we encourage all countries to engage with us, and we are here to offer support, technical advice, and technical assistance to countries that are in need of such assistance to start their vaccination programs. But I must say that Tanzania has also joined AVAT and acquired vaccines. I think that is very, very good news, and a lot of vaccines for that matter. So we are seeing, it is fair to say that we've now seen a significant shift in Tanzania's position. So we are here to support them as much as possible, both through AVAT and also through the vaccination program.
Thank you very much, John. We move on now to Coletta Wamjoyi, who is the FSN. She had 2 questions, one of which has already been answered, and that was on the status of vaccination supply on the continent. That has been dealt with. But her second question is, we see that COVID-19 vaccine producers seeking hubs in African countries, for example, Fisa in South Africa. What are the dangers of Africa not benefiting from knowledge transfer and just remaining as production points? Are there any measures to ensure that this doesn't happen? Perhaps let me give that to Mr. Masiwa.
Yeah, just to pivot, first of all, just something from what my colleague John Kengasong has said. Part of approaching this as the African Union, AVAT and Africa CDC are organs of the African Union. The 3 are not separate. So we work together as one. We engage member states to establish where there is a problem. We are pleased to say that Tanzania has become one of the biggest buyers of AVAT vaccines. They have placed a massive order, and we are helping them, working with the World Bank to get them up to speed. We currently have only 2 countries, so I'm not here to name and shame. There are only 2 countries over which we are still facing difficulties to get them to acquire vaccines, either because everybody must be vaccinated that is willing to be vaccinated for us to achieve our 60%. And by the way, on the anti-vaxxer side, we've done polling through the Africa CDC, and we have established that more than 70% of African people are willing to take a vaccine if it is made readily available. So let us not be drowned by the loud voices of the minority here. Most African people will take vaccines if they are offered. So to your final question, sorry I lost that. Remind me again, what was that last piece?
She was asking any measures to ensure that Africa does not remain just a production point without any knowledge transfer of how to make our own vaccines.
Yes, that's a good question, but let me put it this way. Aspen Pharmaceutical has been is one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the Southern Hemisphere. It's a big company. It may not, vaccines is just one product. They're a South African company with manufacturing facilities across several African countries. These are well-established African businesses, and they are run by Africans. So to the extent that they have entered into this agreement, they have done so knowing what technology transfer they need to carry out their work. Similarly, the Dakar Institute in Senegal is another major hub that we are pushing. They're already able to deliver 60 million doses of vaccines. So the real challenge for us on the vaccine side, if I may say this, on the production side, lest we find ourselves running through rabbit warrens. The most important thing on vaccine production is demand. Demand. It is not the ability to produce a vaccine. This we can do pretty quickly. There are industrialists in Africa who would be happy to do it. Aliko Dangote said to us, tell us, I will set up a facility in Nigeria tomorrow and we can produce vaccines. Because that isn't the issue here. The issue is demand. The ability to, if you set up the facility, will there be demand for the vaccines? Right now, the global architecture around how vaccines are purchased would mean that we would not be able to necessarily get orders to those companies. Suppliers in India, such as Serum Institute, they get 94% of the orders for African vaccines from Gavi and UNICEF. And we've met with Gavi and UNICEF, and we've said, no, this must stop. You've shipped 6 million production jobs to India. We love India, but we love to produce these vaccines here. So what is critical here is for UNICEF, who buys vaccines using donor funding, Gavi, who buy vaccines using donor funding, to place orders with African manufacturers. The manufacturers are here. I can give you a list if you need it, who can ramp up very, very quickly to meet our vaccine production requirements. Yeah, that's the real issue. And by the way, we've met with UNICEF. We met them this week, and I gave them a very simple challenge. You place $200 million order with an African producer and we'll match you. We're working on that together. So if Pfizer produce in South Africa, then we must purchase those vaccines. Who's going to purchase them? UNICEF and AVAT are the only vehicles by which you can purchase, unless they're going to go around country by country trying to find orders. Okay, so we've got to fix the demand side. Without a market, the market is there, yes, but demand and money is skewed towards buying vaccines in India and bringing them to Africa. That's what we need to deal with. The technology piece is pretty straightforward.
All right, thank you very much for that explanation. For Dr. John is a question coming up from Rhoda Odhiambo of the BBC. She says, right now, governments are pushing for vaccine production, but what about regulation? Where is the Africa Medicines Agency in all these plans that are being made? And what will happen if it will not be able to get enough countries to ratify the treaty to bring it into existence?
So thank you, Rhoda. Let's start with the good news that we now have enough countries that have rectified the African Medicine Agency. That is very good news. I think that has really not been talked about enough. So that is extremely helpful. Second thing is that we don't need to get AMA or the African Medicine Agency up and running before you do that. You can use individual country capacity. South Africa and other countries have that capacity to produce authoritative, regulatory, sound opinion to get this vaccine production going. It will be a process. Let's be very clear that building an institution takes time. I mean, the fact that the AMA now has the required signatures for ratification doesn't mean that in the next 1 month or 2 months you get an institution up and running. It will take some time to get it up and running. At the same time, we have national structures that we can rely on. I think that is very important. So I'm very encouraged by what you had Stripe describe as the movement in Africa, whether in South Africa, Morocco, Egypt, Algeria, Senegal, and potential Rwanda, Ghana and Nigeria. Very, very encouraged. I think that is just what a kind of movement that we wanted to see on the continent. Now we have to fix the demand side and also fix the regulatory side. That's why the African initiative, which was launched by President Felix Tshisekedi as the chair of the African Union, called the Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing, is so important. And this afternoon, we'll be launching that platform with key stakeholders there. So I think a lot of good progress with respect to vaccine manufacturing on the continent. Let me just conclude by saying I remain very optimistic that the way and manner in which we will fight the next pandemic, which obviously will be a next pandemic, will be very different from the way we are fighting this pandemic because of all these developments that we are discussing here and that are taking place on the continent.
Thank you very much, John.
And John just reinforced this so that people don't get hung up. There's nothing that we need to do with ARMA that would delay us on the regulatory front. These are our countries, these are regulations. Give an example. The people said, oh, you don't have ARMA yet, so how are you going to issue emergency use authorizations? Dr. John pulled together a committee made up of all the regulators in Africa, and now we issue emergency use authorizations for the whole continent. So we can get through our own regulations. So this is not going to be a barrier. But yes, we will have ARMA up and running.
All right, thank you. We have given an extra 15 minutes. So perhaps this will be the last question before we then go into the summaries. And it is coming from Duncan Miriri, who has the question: China has rejected a second study on the origins of the virus. What is your reaction, please? Dr. John.
So I think WHO is working closely with a team of scientists to address that. And I think we should let WHO guide the process. Dr. Tedros was very clear in his comments last week about the need for more cooperation with China. I think let's let the scientists, the panel of scientists, get to the bottom of that. Knowing the origin of this, the pandemic is very important because this is the only way that will enable us to prepare for and fight the next pandemic. And we all have to rally behind the WHO so that they have the right authority, the empowerment to get to the bottom of this. So let's stay patient and give the scientists, the WHO, the chance to, and the panel that are working on the chance to continue to investigate and go to the root cause of this pandemic, which is a huge pandemic in the last 100 years for all of us. If we don't know the origin, we don't know how it originated, it becomes difficult to plan for and enable ourselves to fight the next pandemic.
Thank you very much, Dr. John. It's now time for us to go into the summaries, but before that, let me just say that a number of colleagues had asked second or third questions, and we have not been able to go through all of them because time was not on our side. So for those colleagues, I wish to advise that perhaps you can hold on to the questions until the next briefing, or you can send them into Nekeron on that WhatsApp number. And that number is +251 94 550 2310. That's +251 94 550 2310. So let's take the next 5 minutes to conclude with summaries. Let me start with Mr. Strive Masiwa. In a minute or so, please give us the main points that you'd like people to remember from today.
We start shipping vaccines that have been purchased from Johnson & Johnson from next week. It will be a monthly, weekly, it will be a weekly process of shipment to countries. We are setting in place the cycles. We have agreed distribution lists with UNICEF. Countries have been notified, and we are very excited that the first shipments will start to reach countries by the end of next week, and we will continue on until our program to deliver 400 million doses is in place. Funding around the vaccines on our side is looking very good. The demand from the countries is in excess of what we have purchased, and we are looking for ways to improve on that. We absolutely welcome the decision by Fisa to join Johnson & Johnson to produce on the African soil in partnership with African companies. We are looking to see other announcements very shortly from manufacturers from other parts of the world who are working with companies in Egypt, in Senegal, in Rwanda, in Ghana, and in a number of other African countries. These are initiatives that we are supporting. We have worked closely with the US government on the allocation of vaccines. We gave them the formula on which to allocate vaccines, and they were respectful of our formula. They are using exactly the same formula that we use for member states. We have informed the member states, and the American government also has a direct bilateral allocation for which we are not a part. But they have published this on their website. It's there. You can go to the White House website and see it for yourself. We continue to urge the donor community to come to meet their pledges because we expected a lot more funding to be made available to COVAX than where we are at present. We are very, very far away from achieving vaccination of our population by December. And we will need considerable greater effort from the donor community to meet their side of the commitments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before we move on to the ambassador, let me request both our panelists to please provide their talking points to our team so that it can be shared. We do share the talking points from Dr. John every week. And so we have requests here from colleagues in the media for the talking points of both the ambassador and Mr. Masiwa. All right, now let's move on to Ambassador Lapen for your main talking points from today, the things that you want people to remember. Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank